Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to start on a series of videos that will go over the past Day 3 CFE topics from 2015 to 2021, how each candidate performed, and solving the most commonly tested topics. This video is going to be focused on assurance, but I'll have other videos coming out for each of the competencies. If you haven't already, it would be great if you could subscribe or give this video a thumbs up. So the overview for today is that we're going to go over the topics that have been tested on the Day 3 of the CFE relating to assurance since 2015 to 2021. And then we're going to look at how candidates performed on these topics. And then lastly, we're going to give examples of how to solve the most frequently tested assurance topics on the Day 3 of the CFE. As you can see, I have listed the past Day 3 CFE cases from 2015 to 2021 and tracked what assurance topics were tested. As you can see, the most highly tested topic is control weaknesses. The next would be the ramp analysis for audits or review, whether it's partially or in full. And when we talk about the ramp, it stands for risk, approach, materiality, and procedures. Then the rest were one-off topics that candidates were tested on. As you can see, in 2015 and 2016, candidates were mainly tested about the ramp approach and control weaknesses. During this period, candidates did fairly well, as the RC, C, and CD summed up to above 82% most of the time. What this tells you is that most candidates are very comfortable in talking about these two topics. So if you are not someone that is comfortable in talking about these two topics, you need to make sure that you get better in these, because on the CFE, you are marked relative to how well other people do. So for you to stand out on a topic that everyone is good at, you really need to show that you know what you're talking about. So now let's look at the 2017 and 2018 CFE. Again, the candidates did pretty well, except for when you look at the procedures for 2017 and you summed up the RC, C, and CD, it was only 64%. So now let's look at what the Board of Examiners said. And for people who don't know who they are, these are the people who actually give comments on how candidates did on the overall exam. And you can actually find all of their comments in each year's Board of Examiner reports. So for this case, the Board of Examiners said that candidates needed to do review procedures. However, a lot of candidates actually gave audit procedures, and a lot of their procedures were either too general, incomplete, or not useful. So my tip here for candidates is that whenever you make procedures, you want to use case-specific facts. I always say that if you can copy and paste your sentence for this case onto another case and would still apply, then it's too general. You need to add in either the company name, the users, or at least some case-specific facts to make sure that your procedures are only applicable to this case and not anything else. Now let's move on to the 2019 and 2020 cases. As you can see, a similar trend arises where candidates did fairly well, except for on procedures. In this year, the Board of Examiners again said that candidates made procedures that were too general, incomplete, or not useful. In addition, the Board of Examiners said that most candidates actually missed what was being asked in the case. So I went back to actually read the case to see if it was written in a way where it was hard for candidates to determine what was actually being asked. However, to my surprise, the required was actually written very explicitly, so maybe candidates missed it because they were just reading too fast or they didn't understand what was being asked. So my tip for you guys is to make sure you actually read your requirements very carefully and you understand what is actually being asked. In addition, your procedures shouldn't be either incomplete, vague, or not useful in determining the underlying risk. So now let's look at the May 2021 CFE. This time, audit procedures was not the lowest thing that candidates performed in. It was actually the risk of material misstatements. So in this year, the Board of Examiners said that candidates either didn't provide enough risk or they didn't provide the risk with the why the risk actually matters to the company, or students actually didn't understand what was being asked because they started talking about the risk, the approach, materiality, and procedures. So the full ramp approach, even though the question really just talked about risk of material misstatements. So again, make sure that you know exactly what is being asked before you start, because you don't want to do it wrong or find out halfway or when you're actually done, that you've misunderstood the actual question that was being asked. Just as a reminder, if you haven't already, it'd be great if you could subscribe or like this video. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know below. So before I go on to the next slide, I just want you to know that I've taken snippets from the past CFEs to solve. And these snippets are only 1 to 2 sentences. I blocked out the company name and I didn't disclose which year they're from. The reason for this is because I know some candidates want to approach each case fresh, and they don't want to have any hints on how to solve them. So if that's you, feel free to watch one of my other videos instead. So I'll give 3 seconds if anyone wants to close the video before we move on. So hopefully not everyone closed the video, and at least 1 or 2 of you actually stayed to watch the rest of it, or else I guess the rest of the video is just a waste of my time. So yeah, now let's start. So here's our control weakness example. As you can see, I blocked off the company name so that you guys can't see what it is. So let's call it ABC Inc. for now. So ABC's software tracks the manufacturing and sales of inventory and is relied on for reporting and planning, which has saved the effort of manually tracking or counting inventory. However, ABC ran into trouble last year when it agreed to a bulk sale of tables that the software incorrectly showed as being in stock. So how to solve any control weakness issues is using the WIR approach, which is starting with your weaknesses, then going on to your implications and recommendations. So it doesn't need to be long, but you need to know that you're using case facts and you have to be direct. So in my solution, I said that the weakness is that ABC relies entirely on its inventory software and does not do manual tracking or inventory counts. Plain and simple. You don't need to use too many fancy words or go into too many details here. So now let's talk about the implication. So this is where you tell them what has happened or what will happen because of the control weakness. Most people actually miss this step, or they jump straight to the recommendation. But this is one of the most important steps when you do the WIR, because without this step, the reader might not care if things are broken. Like in this case, why should the company care if they don't count their inventory? Do they actually lose money because of that? Does it affect them in any way? In my solution, I put that inventory records will be inaccurate, leading to incorrect financial statements and impacted stock levels. So then we go on to writing the recommendation. Just make sure that when you suggest something, it would actually fix the problem and is relevant to the company. Don't tell a mom and pop shop to invest in robotics and an ERP system that will cost millions if they're just a tiny grocery store. You want to make sure that your recommendations are relevant and applicable to the users in the case. So my recommendation for ABC is that they should conduct an inventory count periodically, for example, semi-annually or annually. If differences are noted, they should be adjusted and investigated to determine the root cause. So a lot of people ask me, how many WIRs should I do in my case? My response is always, you should do as many as you have allocated time for in the case. In addition, you should always try to fix the things that are obviously broken, instead of the things that you're not too sure if it's actually something that's a control weakness or it's just you're overthinking it. Because you don't want to fix something that's not actually broken. So what I do is I would prioritize all the obvious issues first, and if I run out of time and I don't get to the non-obvious ones or the ones that I'm kind of borderline on, it's okay, just move on. And to know what are obvious issues, normally in the case they would use strong negative words like no, not, or stopped. So the next type of exam question we're going to try to solve are procedures. And if we start reading from where I've highlighted, it says, please tell me what procedures would be performed by the auditors on ABC's balance sheet and why, so that I know what to expect. In this example, I'm only going to show you procedures for one of the line items as an example. So I've chose accounts payable. So as you can see, I've highlighted the accounts payable row, and I've also brought in the notes that are attached to that line item, which says accounts payable includes amounts owed to the suppliers and the current portion of the long-term debt which was borrowed at the start of the business. So when I tried to solve this question, you have to start with why the procedures have to be done. And again, this is just specific to this case because they asked for it. Not all procedures questions will have this. So I started with the reason why the auditors typically check for the unrecorded liabilities is because there is a risk that the company understates the liabilities to make their financial position seem stronger than it really is. Then we go into a more standard way of doing your procedures, which is starting with the assertions. And in this case, I picked completeness and accuracy. If you're having any issues with determining which assertions you should pick or what the assertions are, then you should really watch a video that I did on assertions. Once you actually get all your assertions, then you can go into writing your actual procedures. You don't actually have to rewrite the assertions every time like I did in brackets. I just did that to show you guys which assertions I'm trying to target with each procedure. So my first procedure is that the auditors will perform a search of unrecorded liabilities. This can involve sampling expenses after year end and determining if they are related to invoices prior to year end. My second procedure is, in addition, the auditors may send letters to your lawyers to see if there are any litigations pending for contingent liabilities. The last procedure I have is that in terms of the salary expense, the auditors may determine if salaries were included in the correct period by reviewing the payroll accruals at the end of the year to determine if they were calculated correctly. So as you can see, I did 3 procedures for one line item, which might have been a little bit too much for this case, because if the user wanted you to comment on the overall statements, then you might not have enough time to cover any of the other line items. So to get breath, you probably only had enough time to do 1 or 2 procedures per line item. However, this is dependent on the case and the time you allocated to the procedures. Again, people always ask me, how many procedures should I do? And again, I always tell them, you should do as many as you have allocated time for. Thanks again for watching. If you liked what you saw, please give this video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, it'd be great if you could subscribe. I'd also appreciate some comments on what you thought about the video or any questions that you might have. Feel free to check out one of my other videos as well. Hopefully this video will help you prepare for the most commonly tested assurance topics on the day 3 of the CFE.